Hey guys, hope you are doing well. In today's video we are going to be looking at some native plants that I will be growing from seed. This year I will be trying to grow 17 different varieties of native plants. In terms of where I got my seeds, most of them I got from Prairie Moon Nursery. I've already planted these ones, but I have more on the way. I also got some from a local native plant group. Thank you, Victoria, for mailing these out. And then also one species of milkweed I sourced myself by going into a ditch and pulling out some milkweed seed pods. So let's take a look at all 17 varieties of plants. Alright, so let's go through our plants. I'm going to post up pictures from Prairie Moon Nursery's websites so that way you can see what these plants look like. This website and this nursery in general has tons of information. It has information on zones for these plants, lighting conditions, and then also what you need to do in terms of stratification to make sure that these seeds germinate. So we're going to start off with our first plant, which is our columbine. So our columbine has really nice red flowers, similar to a lot of hybrid columbines you see, very similar in structure. This native plant is a host for columbine dusky wing, which is a type of butterfly. This columbine is great because it can tolerate sun exposure anywhere from full sun to shade. My goal for this columbine is to be growing it in a lot of shadier places, so I'm hoping it does well. It does top out around 2 feet, flowering between April to June. Next up is our wild blue phlox, so another great flower to plant in the shade. It flowers also between April to June. So if you look at this plant, some beautiful pale blue flowers on this plant, reaching about 1 feet at its max height. The only problem with this plant though is that apparently rabbits do like it, so if you have rabbits eating a lot of your plants, do be careful where you put this. Our next plant is our wild geranium. So similar to our phlox and our columbine, our wild geranium does bloom in the spring. It blooms anywhere from April, moving into the summer into July. So if you look at this plant, you can see some nice flowers there, similar to a lot of the hybrids that you can find in garden centers. But with our native plants, what is nice with them is that they attract a lot of pollinators. So a lot of pollinators are able to access the nectar that's in these plants, and then also the pollen as well. This plant tops out about 1 foot tall, and it's also another great plant that you can put in the shade, although you can put this in the sun as well. So up next are our milkweed. So I actually have 4 types of milkweed that I'm planting. But before I go into them, I'm just going to talk quickly about why you need to plant milkweed, and that's because it supports our monarch population. So if you don't know already, milkweed is a host plant for our monarch butterflies. It's the only plant that monarch butterflies will lay their eggs on, and it's the only food source for the larvae and caterpillars to eat. So in order to support our monarch population, it is important to have milkweed in our gardens. So first up with our milkweeds is our common milkweed. So if you do live in Ontario, common milkweed is a native plant. Outside of Ontario, and especially if you leave North America, this plant may be considered invasive. So somebody on Instagram actually told me not to plant this plant because it's a noxious weed and it's invasive in their area. So do make sure you do some research before you plant this plant. And common milkweed is one of the fastest to establish milkweed plants that you can find, which is probably why you see these in ditches and then also kind of empty fields as well. Very beautiful pink-purple flowers on this plant, attracts tons of pollinators, and it can grow from medium wet soils all the way down to dry soils as long as you are able to give it some sun. It blooms anywhere from June to August. Up next is our purple milkweed. If you like the look of common milkweed but you want a more intense color in your flower, purple milkweed is the plant to go. It's less aggressive than your common milkweed, so it makes it for a much more garden-friendly milkweed. This plant is hard to find though. I managed to get a pack of seeds before it went out of stock on Prairie Moon Nursery, so if you do see this in any of your seed stores, do pick it up. It is a very pretty looking flower. Again, this also grows and needs full sun, topping out at around 3 feet. The flowering period's a little bit shorter, between June to July. But same thing with this plant, an excellent attractor for different types of pollinators and a host plant for our monarch butterflies. Next up with our milkweeds is our world milkweed. This milkweed flowers a little bit later than most other milkweeds, flowering anywhere from July into September. This is a little bit shorter of a plant, topping out at around 2 feet tall. Some pretty white flowers on this and some very fine foliage on this milkweed. Last on our list of milkweeds is our poke milkweed. Our poke milkweed is an interesting milkweed because it's one of the few milkweeds that will actually do well in the shade, which you don't find a lot with milkweeds because they do require a lot of sun in general. This milkweed growing in the shade tops out at around 5 feet tall, flowering anywhere from June to July. If you look at the flowers, it has some pretty white flowers, not as showy as your common or purple milkweed, but it's great that this shade-tolerant plant is able to attract a lot of pollinators and then also still be able to provide a food source for monarch butterflies. So it does really open up a lot of space where you can plant native plants, especially if you have shade. This plant is not aggressive, so it is a garden-friendly plant that you can integrate with other plants. Another plant that is great for the shade is fringed loosestrife. This is not related to our purple loosestrife, which is a plant that you do not want in your garden. This plant, however, is quite aggressive and it's not recommended for small places. So you do want to give this plant room to grow because it can be a little aggressive, but it's great because it does provide you with the potential of creating a nice ground cover. This plant does spread through rhizomes, but it does have amazing pretty flowers and it's a source of food for a lot of bees. Alright, blue stem goldenrod is our next plant. This plant is actually one that I got from ON Native Plants last year and planted underneath my lilac bushes. They actually grew and flowered and they actually look really nice, so I'm excited to be able to grow more and add it to our garden. So this shade-tolerant goldenrod tops out at about 3 feet tall and it's able to do well in drier soil, which is great to see because I have a hard time keeping up with the watering, especially once we reach late summer. It does flower between August to October and it is a great food source, especially into late summer and into the fall for our pollinators. Another shade-tolerant plant that you can grow is Sweet Joe pieweed, and apparently is a magnet for pollinators. The only thing I will caution you with this plant is that it does get very tall. So the approximate height of this plant is 7 feet tall. So do make sure that you give it plenty of space to grow, as it will tower above most of your other plants. This plant will tolerate wet to dry soil, which is great to see, and flowers pink between August to September. So for this plant, I'm only planning on planting a few of these just because of how tall it will potentially get. So in order to not overwhelm my garden beds, I'm only having a few of these planted. If you're looking for a native option to sweet autumn clematis, this clematis is for you. It's also known as Virgin's Bower. This plant grows about 9 feet in a growing season. Very pretty white flowers, and then in the fall you get those fluffy seed pods. Very artsy to look at. This plant will flower anywhere from July to September, and it will tolerate full to part sun, which is great. My goal for this plant is to have it grow on the northeast side of our house, have it ramble and grow and cover part of our railing around our wraparound porch. Up next is our early sunflower. So these seeds were actually given to me from Prairie Moon as part of a free seed pack with the order of seeds that I got. So it'll be interesting to see how these plants do. What I don't like about these is that they're a short-lived perennial. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to self-sow in order to maintain their population, or if they just fizzle out and die. It will be interesting. But very beautiful yellow flowers on this plant, flowering anywhere from June to September and growing around 5 feet tall. Going back to some shade-tolerant plants is our hairy wood mint. Our hairy wood mint does well in moist soils, so if you have a wet, shady spot, hairy wood mint might be a plant for you. This plant grows around 3 feet tall and flowers anywhere from June to September. Moving to a sunnier spot, you can plant common ironweed. Common ironweed does grow quite tall, reaching around 6 feet in height. However, this plant is great because it is a host plant for our American painted lady butterfly. It flowers a beautiful purple. The only caution I will give you is make sure that you give this plant lots of space to grow. It is considered quite aggressive. So for me, in my garden, where I'm planting my common milkweed, I'm also going to be putting some common ironweed, two very aggressive plants, which hopefully will be able to kind of balance themselves out in my narrow strip that I share with my neighbor. Along with ironweed and common milkweed, I'm also planning on planting some New England asters with those two other plants. So a great plant to plant in a sunny area. This aster is very tolerant of a wide variety of soil conditions, so you can grow it in a wet area to a slightly dry location. This aster should do well for you. It grows around 5 feet tall with nice little yellow and purple flowers on this plant, flowering from August all the way until October. This plant is a prolific self-seeder, so I'm hoping that this plant will maintain its footing in its growing area along with two aggressive plants. And to finish off my list of plants, we have two asters which are good for the shade. Both of these plants reach about 3 feet in height and tolerate soil anywhere from medium to slightly dry soil. So the first of our asters is short aster. This one has a slightly larger flower than the next aster that I'm going to be taking a look at. So with most asters, these do flower later into the summer, into the fall. This one will flower anywhere from August into October. A great shade plant that you can plant along with your blue stem goldenrod, which is what I'm planning on doing. And our last plant is our Heartleafed aster. It has little small bluish flowers. This one does flower for a shorter amount of time. It flowers between September to October, but similar to our other aster, it does reach around 3 feet tall and does well in the shade. Anyways, that is my long list of native plants that I plan on planting in the garden. If you've noticed, a lot of the plants that are for the sun tend to be more aggressive because I have a particular space I plan on planting all of them, and then tons of native plants which are great for the shade. My goal really is to up the amount of native plants that I have in my garden, because last year when I planted a lot of native plants like my pearly everlasting, my blue stem goldenrod, butterfly weed, swamp milkweed, and purple coneflower, I noticed a lot more insects in the garden compared to before when I didn't have these in there. And having a garden, you know, is more than just having things look pretty. I do like seeing, you know, a lot of life, those butterflies and those bees coming in to visit, those birds that fly through. And it is important for me in creating my backyard and my space to make it, you know, full of life. It's great to have these pretty flowers, but if it's just that, you know, it's a little boring. So my goal really is just to make it a space full of life where when I go outside, you know, every day I go out there, there's something different, there's something unique, there's an interesting visitor that might come through, you know, that just keeps me excited to go out there and to garden. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. In my next video, where I'll be talking about more outdoor stuff, I'll be going over winter sowing and cold moist stratification for these seeds, because it's, you know, close to that time when you should be planting these native seeds. Anyways, we'll see you later.